Hey, everybody. This is Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and next to me over here is my partner, Rob Shue. This is the Monday edition of the Hammerhead Show. Hope everyone is doing well. A couple folks over in the comment section already. We have E. Kim, who goes by a Korean 49er on Twitter. He's with us. We also have Raphael562, which says, "What's up, Jack and everyone? Good to see you." And then we got Mike Thompson, who jumps in and says, "Just subscribed. Love your content, Jack. Thank you very much." And like I said, today I got Rob with me. Every Monday we get together and talk about the latest news around the 49ers and what's taking place. And obviously today it's a busy day when it comes to quarterbacks, and the quarterback carousel was certainly spinning this morning. Kind of leaves us with the question, what's left? Kind of what are you thinking right now, Rob, when you look at this? I mean, if I go through them really quick, I should first, before I start there, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I mean, it is a hectic day. It is one of those days where my head is spinning. I'm left wondering where the 49ers are going to sit after all the chaos settles. But I'm doing okay. I'm focusing on my breathing, Jack. I'm trying to remain calm. I'm trying to remain logical. It's hard to do with all the emotion flying around on 49ers Twitter.
Yeah, it's definitely going on in all different directions. And like I was starting to say, we have the quarterback carousel spinning around, and a lot of movement today. Started off with the move from the Atlanta Falcons trading their quarterback, Matt Ryan, over to the Indianapolis Colts. And then shortly thereafter, signing Marcus Mariota to be their incumbent quarterback. Not too long after that, we have Jameis Winston signing a free agent deal to return to the New Orleans Saints. So that leaves the 49ers with really one partner, possibly, being the Carolina Panthers. Maybe as a long shot, the Houston Texans. And I understand that Seattle's out there as well, but I don't think we're going to see a trade within the division. What are your thoughts on where everything stands right now?
I mean, it appears that my sort of worst fear is coming to realization that the music is slowing, that this game of musical chairs is coming to an end, and the team, the quarterback without a seat, seems to be the San Francisco 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo. And you name some of the potential landing spots that are out there. I still do believe that, as you mentioned, Seattle is a destination for a quarterback. It's doubtful that quarterback is Jimmy Garoppolo. So you would think you could take that name off of the list unless it gets to a point where the 49ers are willing to release Jimmy Garoppolo, which I don't think the 49ers are there yet. I think they're digging in for the long haul in this thing. And so you're looking at really the Carolina Panthers, who seem pretty hamstrung with their quarterback situation, or potentially the Houston Texans, who seem reasonably okay going into next season with Davis Mills as the starter penciled in. And so this does seem to be a scenario. All the movement this morning after the Matt Ryan domino fell seemed to happen pretty quickly. And it gave you some sense of excitement that maybe the 49ers name would be in there somewhere. It just hasn't been to this point.
Yeah, it just hasn't been. And it's a as you go through it, you mentioned a couple of names, the Houston Texans, and you bring up the fact that they have expressed that they are content moving forward with Davis Mills as their quarterback.
Right.
That is the one location, I think, of the two between Carolina and Houston. I think Houston is the one to maybe pay a little bit more attention to. Houston has some more trade capital because of the moves that they've made to get rid of Deshaun Watson. And they're probably going to be making, so they're going to have some more capital that they can invest. And, the 49ers have already stated they're happy keeping Jimmy Garoppolo as well. They have said that. And so now you might have the 49ers and the Houston Texans in a little bit of a stare down here to see who's going to move first to get the compensation to the right position.
And I do think that the 49ers have exuded a sense of calm as an organization. As a fan base, the fan base has been panicked. The fan base has been acting as if the movie theater is on fire and all of the exits are blocked, right? That's the sense that you get right now. But that's not the sense that you get from any national reports or coming from the 49ers or their close sources, right? The 49ers beat reporters that would typically put out narratives that come directly from the teams. None of those sources seem to be putting out a sense of panic. And so I do believe that the 49ers will be patient with this move, and they're not in a huge hurry. As much as we have imposed these false deadlines on them, I do believe that they still have a ways to go before any real permanent line in the sand is crossed by the San Francisco 49ers. So I think that they will approach this patiently and still do hope to find a trade partner. And as unreasonable as this seems, Jack, I still believe they will find that trade partner.
You still think they're going to move? They're going to get a trade partner, huh?
Well, since
you brought it up, I want to know who they're going to trade to. Who Rob Shue is on the record saying that he still believes the 49ers are going to trade Jimmy Garoppolo, which I don't mind. That's a good deal. Who are they trading him to?
I mean, if I've got to pick between the teams that are still available, I could see Houston making a bad decision, right? You'd think that for a team that is attempting to rebuild, that's in the position that they're in, that starting a young quarterback that they haven't committed much to would be a reasonable course of action. It would allow them to see where they're at as a team. Houston doesn't always act as a reasonable organization, I think, as illustrated by many of their moves. And they're an organization that is attempting to reclaim the narrative around the quarterback position specifically. So this would offer them an opportunity to bring in a glimmering face, a jawline that is, envy of the nation, and sell that idea of the wholesome American quarterback again to their fan base. So I could see this as a potential PR move for the organization as a whole that could help lift them out of the Deshaun Watson doldrums.
Yeah, I think Houston does make the most sense for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, they do have a young quarterback. I don't think it's a bad decision on their part. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is a better quarterback than Davis Mills.
Mm-hmm.
Houston also has understanding of who Jimmy Garoppolo is. Their general manager was in New England when the Patriots drafted Jimmy Garoppolo, so Nick Caserio is familiar with Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's another point I think that needs to be made.
Yes,
and I don't think that Houston is quite as bad as everybody believes. This is a team that was continually in the playoffs when they had Deshaun Watson, who I understand is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Obviously, that's why he has the high, the contract that he received from Cleveland, and it took Cleveland as much capital as it took to bring him in. But what that shows is that when they have a good quarterback, a better than average quarterback, somebody that's not a rookie making those kind of mistakes, they can win games. And so I think that for Houston, a move for Garoppolo could put them in the playoff picture in the AFC on the bottom end. Maybe not quite as much now that I feel like I feel like Indianapolis made a really good move picking up Matt Ryan. I feel like that's a good move that puts them in the playoffs this year.
Yes, it does. I would think so.
Yeah. So Houston would be the team for me. I wanted to bring up this is a little bit of a segue. I'm trying to find it now. Dirk had a comment. Dirk Pippen, he had a comment here. He says, Lynch lied about the 2 second-round picks. Or did he? Because this takes us back to this morning before the trades all started to go down. The first report that we saw was from Mike Florio of NBC Pro Football Talk, stating that the 49ers had 2 second-round picks, offers for 2 second-round picks in exchange for Jimmy Garoppolo. I find this to be the timing of that story to be interesting, considering Matt Ryan was traded mere hour, not very long after that story broke, and he went for only a third. I just find this to be an interesting story. And also when you go through it, he kind of buries the lead a little bit on that whole thing. When you read through the story, it's not like it's the first, it's even the bombshell at the beginning of it. He kind of buries it along the way. What are your takeaways on this? Do you think that the 49ers really had 2 second-round picks on the table and that they're not going to get that now? Or do you think that maybe Florio's exaggerating a bit here?
I struggle to believe that the 49ers had 2 second-round picks on the table and didn't jump at that offer. To me, this sounds more like the type of back and forth where terms are being discussed, right? Where it's potential that, hey, this is what we're looking for. Well, what if we put this out type of a scenario, so that it's still technically true that it was offered, quote unquote. But in reality, was it a firm offer that the 49ers could have snatched off the table at that time? I do struggle with two competing ideas. I struggle to believe that John Lynch is inherently lying. I don't picture him to be the type of individual that would just make something up. I do believe that within NFL circles, there's a big difference between lying and exaggeration, or, playing something up to be something that it really isn't. So I could believe that there were preliminary trade talks wherein some parameters of a trade were discussed, wherein a second round and another pick were, thrown around as potential compensation. That to me strikes me as something that is true. So I want to believe that John Lynch isn't a liar. And I also want to believe that they would have taken a deal like that. So one of those things has to be less true than the other.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm going to just throw out really quick right here, and this is nothing to do with John Lynch, but this has everything to do with Mike Florio and the way, well, I guess I shouldn't say it doesn't have anything to do with John Lynch, because it does a little bit. I think that this comes down from a reporter who last year was bitten by the assumption that the 49ers were going to be going with Mac Jones. Constantly, this was one of the reporters that kept pushing that it's going to be Mac Jones, it's going to be Mac Jones, it's going to be Mac Jones. Everything's telling me it's going to be Mac Jones. The 49ers then pull it and go with Trey Lance. And once that all goes down, they're like, hey, why would I go out? They kind of made a mockery of some of the national media in the way that they're like, hey, why would hey, if you guys want to give bad information, we'll let you do it. You're doing our job for us. And so now you have a national media member who is one of those that does that, and obviously has some could have a. If you go back and just listen to everything that Florio said, he definitely seems like he always has an axe to grind with what the 49ers are doing. And so my thought here is that Florio put this out because it's easy to do. Everybody's going to believe that the 49ers would have botched this with the 2 second-round picks, because that's what the 49ers have been talking about wanting to get, as a high draft pick. And this sure sounds like something where Florio's maybe getting a little bit of his back now.
Yeah, I could see that. He seems to be a bit vindictive. He's come across that way on Twitter multiple times. I mean, just recently, he had this weird exchange where he was like, hey, I was off the record with somebody. They came at me pretty hard. I'm not going to throw anything out there about what they said, but just so that everyone knows, there was someone that came at me sideways, and I'm choosing not to put it out there, right? But in putting things out there, he was choosing not to put something out there. He just didn't assign someone's name to it. So he does strike me as the type of individual who takes offense. He does strike me as the type of individual who would attempt to get some sort of retribution. I just don't know where it all stems from. I mean, where does the bad blood between, it's existed for a long time now, where does the bad blood between Florio and the Niners brass or the Niners organization stem from?
Yeah, and that's something that I don't really know enough about it, because I know that Florio has been, I think he's a big Minnesota Vikings guy, and maybe he's tired of watching the 49ers beat the Vikings year after year.
Be.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's really not even. Maybe it didn't even start with the brass himself, but it just has to do with the 49ers. I don't know, but that's definitely where I think that came from. I didn't want to take the time to actually put that in print, because I don't think the Florio needs any extra advertisements for his work. So I decided not to do that. I figured, but hey, it's perfect conversation here for us on the Hammerhead Show, which I've got to get a better banner for us, because I keep having the Jack Hammer Show, but this is really the Rob and Jack Show with the good times.
Yes, good time Hammerheads.
That's right. And like the armchair quarterback says, it gives us $10. He says, for the Hammer Foundation Suds Fund. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Gotta love that.
That will, if this week continues to go the way that today went, that is going to come in very handy on Saturday. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I've been allocating all of my super chats for to pay off my psychologist that I'm having to see much more frequently with everything that's going on with this organization. I'm now up to 3 sessions a week just to keep from going clinically insane, and it's not going well.
That's right. And I'm gonna bury the lead a little bit here, because I'm not going to jump right into the whole quarterback thing, because I think that there's some other information that folks might find interesting, and I think kind of leads into it a little bit better. I want to know what your thoughts are so far on the free agency moves for the 49ers. They haven't been any big names. Travis Ward would be, I guess, the biggest, $14 million contract is what it was originally reported at. But you look at his cap hits, it's going to be about 3.8 this year, and then it's a little bit higher the 2 years after that. Other than that, though, they spent money on a rotational defensive tackle and 3 guys who are going to be backups or and / special team help. 2 of them on defense, 1 on as a kick returner / receiver. Where do you land right now with where the 49ers are?
I'm a bit in the middle, Jack. There are some things that I'm disappointed about and some things that I'm very pleased with. And it leaves me feeling like the 49ers have done okay in free agency so far. The things I'm disappointed about are my top 3 priorities were re-signing 3 of our own. And all 3 of those have since gone the way of the dodo bird with regard to the 49ers, right? Laken Tomlinson, gone. DJ Jones, gone. Raheem Mostert, gone. So those 3 stung for me because that was priority number 1 was to go out and re-sign your own, to bring back your own guys. And I didn't think it was going to be possible to sign all 3 of those. I knew we would let go of at least 1, but my hope was we'd be able to bring 2 out of those 3 guys back. To lose all 3 feels disappointing. To lose all 3 while you have Jimmy Garoppolo still on the books, very disappointing because it's hard not to emotionally, if not logically, link those 2 events. And then I would say with the signings that they did make, I was reasonably pleased. I thought that it was a good value signing and a scheme fit, which are Charvarius Ward. I would have been more excited initially from the J.C. Jackson deal, but in comparing the contracts, I do think that the 49ers got a good one in Charvarius Ward and approached it in an intelligent fashion. And then I love addressing special teams. I love the focus that they have had on that phase of the game, Jack. Just thrilled with that.
Yeah, I see. I agree with you. I think it's been a much better free agency than some people feel.
Mm-hmm.
I think before you get into who they lost and I guess before you get into who they signed, when you look at what they have, this is a team that right now they lost Laken Tomlinson, they lost AJ Jones. They're likely to lose Jaquiski Tart because he's going to be a free agent. They lost Tom Compton to free agency. He was a backup to begin with. But this is a team that has 18 of the 22 starters from the 2022 NFC Championship game coming back. So they have a great deal of talent on their starting side. They also were able to bring back and re-sign a number of their own players already. Some of them depth pieces, some of them starters. And, guys like Azeez Al-Shaair, Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles, who is going to help out with special teams as well. There's a number of those guys. I don't have all of them in front of me, but if we were to go through the list really quick, let me pull it up. It's, they tendered Azeez Al-Shaair. They tendered Daniel Brunskill. They also brought back Kevin Givens, JaMychal Hasty. Those are the restricted and exclusive rights for agents that they, reached agreements with. So that's really good depth, and some of those are starters. On top of that, they brought in Charvarius Ward, addressing a need to really make their defensive backfield stronger. They were one of the pieces with the way that this defensive secondary played last year that they needed to improve on was when they had Ambry Thomas, they had to play soft, and that's why we saw so much too deep safety looks, is because they were trying to help out Ambry Thomas. Now you have a guy who can play up tighter. So I think that helps the secondary, and I think that's an understated signing for the 49ers. The other 3,
I agree.
Yeah, thank you. And then there's the 3 that are primarily special teams guys, which address a big problem for the 49ers. The special teams unit was not good last year. It cost them at least 1 game for sure during the season, almost cost them a second in the postseason. They did help them out with 1 win somewhere along the line. I think
somewhere there along the line.
But overall, their special teams was not good.
No.
Their kickoff and kickoff return teams, regardless of what happened in Green Bay, weren't good all throughout the year. So there was some big help there, and I also think that Hassan Ridgeway helps to kind of fill the gap of what they're losing with not DJ Reed, but GJ Jones at defensive tackle. So I'm pretty happy with that. When you just considering the fact that they have so many guys coming back. They have so many of their own guys from the starting group. They have so many of their backups coming back, and they have a good core, I think, of players already on their team. So it's not like they had a large number of gaps to fill from a team that was 6-10 last year. So from that standpoint, I feel like their free agency moves have been about like what we should have expected.
Yeah, I like the way that you presented that. I mean, you're basically looking at, some of the exterior fringe players that have a greater impact than most people would care to acknowledge, that the 49ers have done a good job of bringing back some of their own in that regard. They've addressed a few of the needs. And then you do have to acknowledge that in the positions where the 49ers were unable to secure their own guys, they're pretty well set. The three that I mentioned, you have Laken Tomlinson. Obviously, it's a pretty straightforward path to try and plug in Aaron Banks at left guard. I would think that fans out there will be skeptical of that, but the 49ers will have a pretty good idea of what they have there and what they've seen from Aaron Banks so far in practices. And so if they're comfortable moving along without adding someone for real competition there at left guard, then they must feel he is capable of taking that role. And then obviously Javon Kinlaw, we can't know how he has recovered as of yet, but that in addition to the Hassan Ridgeway signing, you would think that helps to bolster them against the loss of DJ Jones. And certainly Raheem Mostert would have been a nice to have within the running back room. But when you look at the entirety of that running back room, it's a pretty stacked room that did pretty well last season without having Raheem Mostert on there. So that one for me is going to be very painful to watch him if he's healthy all year within Mike McDaniel's system. If he blows up, that's going to be difficult to stomach that we didn't have him on the 49ers adding that value to our backfield. But it's more emotional losses at this point. And if I move past it into the logic, that you have to build a roster in this way. You cannot have 7 players on your roster potentially who are getting paid at the top of their field for their particular position. You then don't have the money to fill out the rest of the roster. You have to make difficult decisions. I think for me and for many out there, the idea is the allocation of resources. And that's the tough part when you start looking at the chunk that's currently allocated to the roster in the Jimmy Garoppolo spot.
Yeah, and I hear you. And that's a situation the 49ers in. There's other teams that are in that group as well when it comes to that. I don't have as big of a problem with the allocation of the money right now to Jimmy Garoppolo because I feel like he's an asset to the 49ers. We're going to get to that a little bit right now. We might as well do this. But before I take that a little bit further, let's hit the super chat from Chris Royal, because this is a good one. He says, thank you for the super chat. He says, Lynch, we have an offer for 2 second rounders. Also, Lynch, too bad those Canadian Football League picks don't count. That's good, because I actually saw this. Well, not that, but a couple before the weekend, I think it might have been Friday, somebody was talking about where's Garoppolo going to go, or there's not going to be a market. I was going to say the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I did see on Twitter that Matt Barrows of the Athletic mentioned the Montreal Alouettes a little bit ago. So, Chris, you're on the same path with a lot of other folks here. That is a bummer that those maybe it's not even to the CFL. Maybe they're going to try to trade them to the Tampa Bay. What were they called? Tampa Bay Bandits. Maybe he's going to become a Tampa Bay Bandit of the USFL. Maybe that's what they're going to try to do. All jokes aside, let's do. I want to get into what you just mentioned, though, Rob, in terms of some like the allocations of assets and things like that. I've mentioned this a number of times on various streams. But I'll go through it here. But are the 49ers potentially headed for a quarterback competition in training camp in 2022?
I mean, you use the word potentially there. And so in answer to that, I have to say yes. I think there is the potential that Jimmy Garoppolo is on this roster come training camp. I think it is, in my mind, still highly unlikely. And the primary drivers for my belief in that are that I do not believe the 49ers want to risk an injury situation where Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt, as they are still actively attempting to trade him while creating some sort of a quarterback competition in camp. If he were to get injured, to fully guarantee that salary for the entire year, not to have him as a backup, not to have him on the roster, but just to carry that salary, to me feels like the only nightmare scenario left that would dissuade the 49ers from having him come into camp and having a quarterback competition.
I, yeah, and I guess maybe my question should have been should have just been, are the 49ers headed for a quarterback competition? Because right now, with the way that everything's situated, it sure seems like they are. I put out a tweet over the weekend, that it's going to be fun to cover the 49ers quarterback competition between Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance. And that got folks all fired up. But I was only mildly joking because this is, I think, going to happen. There's I don't know where they're going to send him to at this point, unless somebody overpays or they just give him away for free. I don't think they give him away for free, but unless they give him away for a low pick, I think you're going to end up in training camp with Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance on the roster. It's something that I've talked about for a while. If the 49ers, you got to go back. Do we believe what you mentioned that John Lynch doesn't lie, or it's hard to say that he's lying. If we go back and we listen to what John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan said repeatedly last offseason, they continued to say that the reason that they're keeping both these quarterbacks on the roster, they kept Jimmy Garoppolo last year and Trey Lance, is because they needed to make their backup quarterback position better. I understand that you don't want to be paying your backup quarterback nearly what Jimmy Garoppolo is going to cost you, but wouldn't you be playing smart with considering the 49ers history at that position by keeping Jimmy Garoppolo, or perhaps maybe even asking him to restructure his contract to lower his cap hit for 2022, knowing that the cap is going to be going up in 23, but really exploding in 24, where you can bury some of that dead money.
Yeah, at that point, I just wonder what the relationship is like, because you had an interesting phenomenon where Jimmy said goodbye to the fan base, to the team. I mean, that was like no question about it. That was a goodbye from Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't expect to ever be standing here in this media room for the 49ers ever again, right? It just got put out on Twitter again today. And to me, that is a difficult emotional situation to put yourself into if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, to then come back. And so I don't know that, ironically, it's his move of the surgery that really probably put them in this situation. So if he doesn't want to be back, the irony is that it's probably his own actions that cause him to be back with the San Francisco 49ers. And if he does want to be back, now he's created this sort of weird environment of like, do you really want to be back in a toxic environment where you're kind of wanted? You've created this, environment where we can't get rid of you and get any value in return. So we're going to keep you here because you are an asset. But I just see this as a very potentially toxic locker room environment for the San Francisco 49ers. And it seems to me that they would be better off eating a little bit of crow, looking as if they did make some mistakes along the way and getting Jimmy off of the roster, as opposed to pushing all this stuff into one really flammable combination and then just hoping it doesn't explode.
Yeah, I hear it. It's interesting because that's what we all said last year, right? We all talked about it. I know that I know that I wrote an article about it long before it ever happened, right around the time of the draft, that the 49ers needed to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo to make it Trey's team. So for me to be here now and saying that it makes sense for the 49ers to bring him back, the only reason that I say it makes sense is because they just did it, right? We all thought that the 49ers were going to have trouble, balancing these two out, and they made it through the season just fine. There might have been some stuff going on behind the scenes that didn't bubble over the surface and keep the team from winning games down the, especially as they kind of found themselves over the second half of the year. So that's the only reason that gives me maybe a little bit of optimism that they could pull it off again. But, I think you'd have to get into the training camp and let the two fight it out. And you share reps however you want to share them, or whatever you're going to do in order to see who's best. But I could see that occurring. Like you said, does Garoppolo agree to a restructure of his contract, because that does require him to agree to it? That, I think, is the tougher sell of the two than the thought that he could be back. I think getting him to agree to a smaller deal. The only reason I even think that that's a possibility, or I even throw it out as a possibility, is because I don't believe he's going to get $25.5 million from another team if he goes onto the free agent market and somebody has to sign him.
Right.
So So my
Barring
thought
some
is you
sort of
take,
an injury scenario where some team gets very desperate and there's competition for him. I see what you're saying there, because in order to get that, people either have to believe that's what you're worth. And if people believe that's what he was worth, then you would think he'd get traded already, or there has to be enough competition to drive it up. And right now, as we're pointing out, there aren't very many of those seats still available.
yeah, because you can give him let's say you give him 15 million on a signing bonus. I'm just throwing a number out there. That 15 million on a signing bonus, guaranteed 10 million of his dollars of his salary for this season. That's a salary cap of $17 million. Saves the 49ers 10 million on the cap. Still gets him his $25 million in cash that he's due and all that kind of stuff. Again, long shot to happen there. And that's the other part with this whole quarterback competition, quarterback situation the 49ers have put him in, and free agency, is they're going to need to get more money at some point. And I know
Right.
we had a little bit of talk about this on Friday. We can still have it here. Is has Jimmy Garoppolo kept the 49ers from making a signing and picking up a free agent that they'd like to get? I don't. I find it hard to believe, given the names that they've been attached to, that that's the case. Because most of those guys, some of like the wide receivers that have been out there that they've been talked about aren't guys who would normally be your 1, 2, 3 type. That's who they would be, and the 49ers are pretty much settled there. Some of these names that are out there are just a little bit bigger than I think the 49ers were going to go big on anyway. I don't think they're going to spend $8 million on the cap this year on Von Miller, for example, even though I would have liked it.
It's tough to know which of these free agents the 49ers would be more active on if they had additional money available. I think where I completely agree with you is if the 49ers had been in love with any of these free agents, they absolutely could have gotten the deal done. And so I think you can extrapolate from that they probably wouldn't have been heavily involved any more than they already were in these free agents, because they have the wiggle room to get around the Jimmy Garoppolo scenario, and they didn't make those moves. So you would think that would indicate that they weren't wild about these. But there is a difference between having the funds readily available and having to decide, well, do we further commit ourselves to these individuals who are already on the roster and may complicate our situation going forward in order to sign this free agent. So I think it's impossible to truly know if the 49ers would have gotten any of these free agents if they had been able to move Jimmy Garoppolo. But what I think you can say with absolute certainty is if they were wild about any of these free agents, they would have made the deals work.
I think that's accurate. I think, right now the 49ers can still free up some salary cap. They don't really have, I guess they could go to Fred Warner and redo his deal for like $1.5 million, go to Trent Williams and free up some cap space from there. I really think the 49ers are better off not touching either of those deals, especially Fred Warner, because they can go into next year. If you look at the way Fred Warner's contract is set up, he has a pretty big base salary next year. And with the salary cap going up in 2024, the new TV deal kicks in 2023. So the first year of the salary cap getting impacted by that deal is going to be 2024. So that's the year that's the year to expect the salary cap to really jump, like everybody's been talking about. The way that Fred Warner's deal is set up works perfect for that, for the 49ers to do a restructure with him at that point. Kind of like what we've seen with Eric Armstead this year already and so on. So I don't think you see him do it this year. I think Warner would get done next year. But it's guys like Jimmy Ward. Is Jimmy Ward somebody who you think the 49ers view as a longtime prospect? And if the answer is yes, then that's a deal that they should be, if they're not already working on getting an extension done for, which will provide some cap relief. Same thing with Emmanuel Mosley. Do you believe that Emmanuel Mosley is somebody that the 49ers view as a long-term prospect? If so, that's a name that you would look to extend. So there are ways that they can get it. Obviously, it's not as easy as just making the guy do it, but there are ways that they could potentially save some money. And real quick, Charles, thank you for the donation. Says Lynch let his mouth overload his behind on Jimmy G. He's definitely on the hot seat right now with the 49er faithful. That's for sure.
He is. It really, really got hot for Lynch quickly. The fan base is incensed. And I suppose I understand to some extent why they are. The 49ers did make this bed by promoting some of the storylines that made it seem as if trading Jimmy Garoppolo was a foregone conclusion and that it would be fairly easy to do. Now, not all of those came directly from the organization, but they all came from sources that are close enough to the organization that lead you to believe those sources were in contact with the 49ers as they put out those stories about interest that had developed at Jimmy Garoppolo. We went into the combine. We heard about significant interest in a trade at that time. And then it all got quiet. Now, some of these things are unpredictable events that occurred that were out of the 49ers' control. The speed with which Tom Brady unretired was not to be expected, even by those that doubted he was done playing football. I think most thought he would take longer than he did in deciding to do that. Russell Wilson actually getting traded out of Seattle. I know I was waiting to see it happen before I would actually believe it. And then some of these dominoes hurt Jimmy Garoppolo's value because it took away some of the seats that should have been open for a quarterback.
Well, I think, and I think that the other piece was that, you mentioned how at the combine there was a lot of talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, but it was also at the beginning of the combine when news broke about the shoulder surgery. And if we're to believe
unexpected news of the shoulder surgery,
right? And so Diana Rossini, who works for ESPN, she's really good. Said today put out on Twitter. So why didn't the Colts go after Jimmy G? From what she was told, there were concerns over the shoulder injury, not so much the medical side of it, but the idea of him missing time in the offseason with a new team. This was a red flag. And this is something a lot of folks have been talking about. It's something that I understood, but it wasn't something that I thought would be a deal breaker. If what she's saying is completely accurate, then I was definitely wrong. But I could understand how a team would want this guy to be a part of their process throughout OTAs and mini camps and all those types of things, just to get a feel for everybody on the roster and, to know that he's going to be ready to go week day one of training camp. And right now with the injury, the 49ers just, couldn't do it.
And it does make sense that the teams that are looking at Jimmy Garoppolo are the teams that view themselves as capable of winning right now. And part of the idea of winning right now is being prepared going into the 2022 season. And if you're not going to get as much time with that quarterback, does that take some of the shine off the idea of bringing in that veteran who's supposed to help you win right now if you're somewhat skeptical that he's going to be up to speed and therefore able to help you win right now?
Correct. And I agree with you there. I'm just looking to see if there was any comments. There were a couple that were interesting.
I like the comparison of me to Robbie Gould. That to me is delightful. I might be Robbie's brother. I'm not entirely sure about it.
I can tell that right there. That's from Jay Nubbs. Tell me Rob isn't Gould's brother. You've already got the same first name, right?
That's right.
We start calling you Robbie, and everybody will just figure I'm talking to Robbie Gould on a regular basis.
Done.
There we go. But kind of just keeping on this whole quarterback situation and the thing that we've got running through there. The 49ers have a couple of big names that are going to be up for that have contracts that are coming. Deebo Samuel, Brandon, Nick Bosa. In your estimation, does Garoppolo and the fact that he's still lingering around and possibly on the roster in 2022 impact Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa and their extensions?
I don't believe so. I think if he is on the roster for the entirety of 2022, that could change my opinion, because then that becomes money that's fully vested and given to Jimmy Garoppolo. As it stands right now, you just have that $25 million earmarked to go to Jimmy Garoppolo. And if they're able to trade him, that money comes off of the books. They will have that flexibility. The first thing I would say about Bosa and Deebo is that it's my belief, regardless of whether Jimmy's on the roster or Jimmy's not on the roster, both of those deals, when they get done, will be heavily backloaded to take advantage of that, wildly exceeding cap number that's going to hit at some point, whether it's from the gambling money that comes in, the TV money, all of it coming together in this perfect storm. I agree that 2023, 2024 cap number is going to be something to behold for the NFL. So to me, it becomes a question of, do the Niners feel like they can still move some of those other contracts to get what they need in those initial terms with Bosa and Debo? And then the other question is whether they're actually going to do Bosa's contract this offseason or whether it ends up waiting. So if all you need to do is you end up saying, hey, we're going to extend Debo, he's looking at a cap number that's pretty manageable within the first year. All we need to do is extend Jimmy Ward or renegotiate that contract to free up the cap space to get it done, then I don't think that's standing in the way of both deals. And even if you need to get both done this offseason, it feels like there's enough wiggle room with some of those other contracts for the 49ers that they can clear enough for the first year hits on those deals.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you that I don't think it's going to impact either one of them. I think that the Nick Bosa deal is not going to get done this year. Nick Bosa's deal is going to get done next year. Again, pointing to the explosion of the salary cap in 2024 that everybody's expecting with the new TV deal. That's when it hits. So what you do is you give him that fifth year option. You let him play out on that next year, or you use that as part of your negotiation to a deal that is going to mostly hit starting in 2024 and beyond. I think the deal with Deebo Samuel is going to be very similar. They're going to try to structure that in a way that is very similar to what they did with Fred Warner this past season. If you remember, they gave Fred Warner became the highest paid linebacker in the NFL. His cap hit was under $4 million.
Right.
It was over it was just under $20 million per year. And his cap hit stayed the same as what it was supposed to be, like around 3.3 million or in that ballpark, whatever the number was. Deebo Samuel's current contract calls for him to get $4.89 million. So the 49ers can use that same exact structure. Who knows what they do in terms of guarantee, signing bonus, and those kind of things. But I have a feeling they're going to structure whatever it does if it comes down this year, that it's going to come in at his salary cap number being right around $5 million. 4.89 is what he is now. And so that's a small amount. So when you talk about Garoppolo impacting Bosa and Samuel, I don't think so, because the bulk of the money in terms of cap hits for those two players is going to come when Jimmy Garoppolo is long gone.
Agreed.
So that's partly why I say that there. And then since we just keep going up back and forth on this one, I did see a question over here by Gary Dodson. It's not a question, it's a comment, somewhat of a question. And he says, "We dump Montana faster than Jimmy G." What the heck? Right? And I think you got to take a step back, because that is not correct, my friend. That is incorrect. Joe Montana got hurt in 1990. He was on the roster throughout the 1991 season. Didn't play. He was on the roster throughout the 1992 season and did not play until the second half of the last game of the season against the Detroit Lions. So Joe Montana was injured and was on the 49ers roster for 2 years. Obviously, they didn't have salary cap in 92 and 91. A little bit different there. But he was on the roster for 2 years injured.
And it was an ugly trade scenario, right? I mean, even after the terms of the trade began to surface, you had Eddie DeBartolo come out, and there was sort of the last minute, like, please don't go, Joe. You can have your starting job back. And he turned that down. And, there was an awkward dynamic between George Seifert and Eddie D in that exchange. It was messy at the end there. And we just sort of forget about it because, the history is what it is, but it was messy.
Rob, I was just thinking, like, there's a whole generation of 49er fans who don't remember what it meant. They don't realize they don't know the 49ers of the 90s. They know the 49ers of the 2000s, but they don't remember the 49ers. So they hear the stories about, and maybe, and Gary might have been around back then, but and I'm not even speaking to him, I'm just in general. There are a lot of folks who weren't around back then who have learned that information from their dads and their grandfathers and folks like you and me who were around at that point. Right. And it was messy. It was a messy situation. There were a number of 49er fans who sat around me at the 49er games those years in 94 who wore Joe Montana Chiefs jerseys to the games. It was a mess. It was a mess until they won the Super Bowl in 94. Throughout, those first couple of years with him on the team, it was a mess.
It
And
was
that's
it
part of
was
why
so
it was hard
messy
for
that
him.
this 13-year-old thought Steve Bono should probably be the starting quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. My brother was on Camp Young and I was Camp Bono, and I was wrong about that. The first of many things that I've been wrong about in my esteemed career, Jack.
I was 100% in Camp Joe Montana. I was a senior in high school back in '91, so that was the year that he was missing due to injury. And
Yes.
I think I might have told the story before, but I was at walking out of football practice one day. I'm a big Joe Montana guy. My backup quarterback was a big Steve Young guy. We had stayed after practice to throw some balls around. I was helping him with some stuff, and we got to talking about it. And he started telling me a little bit too much about Steve Young, and I'll just say we didn't talk the rest of the way into the locker room because they're almost the ball bag got dropped at one point. Let's just say that. That's what it was like in 19.
It was intense. Yeah, I was Team Montana all the way, but in between the backups, I favored Bono, and that was I still feel that one in my soul.
Look at that. Gary says that he worked concessions at Candlestick at the time also. So that is fantastic. Way to go, Gary.
Nice.
Way to go. Some of those hot dogs and everything like that. You smell that stuff coming down yeah, that's awesome.
Oh
that's
man,
awesome.
I can feel and picture and taste Candlestick. Like I can honestly, like the smells, it is so top of mind for me. I spent so much time. I know that's true for you as well, Jack. Like, Candlestick, the good
walking through those old swinging doors off of the walkway into the lower bowl of the stadium. Yes. Absolutely. You're on the other side of me. I was on the south, on the north. I was on the south side. You were on the north side, but yes,
yeah,
that was,
we were basically looking across at one another, Jack.
Pretty close to it. Pretty close to it. That's for sure. That was fun. And then, just looking at the way the team is constructed right now, I went through it earlier as far as 18 of the 22 starters from the NFC Championship game returning, yada yada yada. Maybe 17, I guess, if you don't count Jimmy Garoppolo. But that's where Trey Lance fills in. Are there any holes remaining on the roster that you want to see them fill, or you think they absolutely have to fill?
I mean, absolutely have to. No. But it would be nice to continue to address some of the remaining holes. As I look at special teams, I'm relatively excited with the way in which the 49ers chose to invest in it. Were they all ideal moves in my book? I don't know at this point in time. There are some that I would have played a little bit differently because they come with, a name attached to them. But when I look at them holistically for the special teams, I'm thrilled. That unit to me seems to be a much more well-rounded unit after the moves the 49ers have made. When I look at the defense, I think to myself, well, there are still some holes along that defensive line. I do trust, however, that the 49ers can develop and find some gems in the rough, right? Find the gems in the rough, polish them up, put them in with Chris Kosarick, and magic seems to happen. So those holes I'm not as concerned about. The 49ers certainly did a good job in addressing the depth and hole needed at the cornerback position. You could argue that the nickel cornerback position is not yet set, but I really liked what Matt Barrows had to say on the Niners potentially going with the similar system of what they used back in 2011 when they took Chris Culliver in the draft, and then he would ride the bench until the nickel package came in, and then Carlos Rogers would slide inside from the outside corner, and Culliver would come into the outside corner position. So you could see Ambry Thomas on the pine, and then as soon as the 49ers go into the nickel, you could see Emmanuel Mosley sliding inside. You would have Ward on the outside, Ambry Thomas on the outside as well, and then E-Man sliding in. But I'd like it if the Niners went after a nickel cornerback specifically. The safety spot is the one that feels like the Niners went cheap on in defense. And granted, it's my own ignorance with regard to whether the safety that they've recently signed is going to develop into a starting caliber safety. He certainly is a more than capable special teams player. But I just don't know whether you're going to see George Odom legitimately competing for that starting spot. And then along the offensive line, that's the biggest question mark for me with the 49ers. Those, to me, seem like the two most glaring holes. The safety position, and then offensive line feels like more than one position, but a guard would make me feel a heck of a lot better. A starting caliber guard.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is most of these that we're talking about now with the holes. I don't know if there's any holes that they don't already have a name that they can fill in just based off of their depth. I
Right.
really feel like, I know that we're focused. I mean, we're so focused on what they haven't done at this point. We just hear so much talk about that, not here necessarily, but just on Twitter around the 49ers in general. If you're consuming 49ers information, you're just seeing so much about what they haven't done. And I think you need to take a step back a little bit. I feel like we still have, we're free agency started on Wednesday. We're not even a full week into the actual free agency period,
It's
guys.
wild.
So just take a little step back, take a deep breath. There's plenty of time. They may get a guard. They might. I think they do need to get an offensive lineman. Do they get that guy in the draft or do they get him now? I
Right.
think they do need to get a safety. It's a strong draft for safeties as well. So do they get that guy in free agency or do they get him in the draft? Same thing along the defensive line. The defensive end is a spot that I keep hearing about is very steep, deep in the draft. It really seems like their need positions are the deeper spots in the draft when it comes to that as well. So, I've seen some folks over in our comment section talking about the offensive line. I know you mentioned it, Rob. Okay, the 49ers left tackle, we know who that is. He's on the roster. He's still coming back.
Yes.
The center, we know who the center is. We're pretty certain who the center is going to be, and it's going to be the same guy who was just a center last year. The right guard could be improved, but if it's not improved, we know that it's good enough to get the 49ers to the NFC Championship game, maybe a little bit better than that if they get better quarterback play. So that's 3/5 of your offensive line. And then you got your left guard spot and your right tackle spot. Left guard, the 49ers are taking a leap of faith when it comes to, probably Aaron Banks at left tackle or left guard.
Mm-hmm.
But and same thing at right tackle. If McGlinchey is not able to come back week one, you've got a few guys that can battle that out for that spot as well. There's definitely going to be some battles there. At some point, when you're paying the guys that you're paying, George Kittle, Eric Armstead, Trent Williams, Fred Warner, it's going to be Debo Samuel and some of these other guys. If you're going to spend the money on your keyline talent, you're going to have to take some, not risk, but you're going to have to trust your process at some of these other positions. And so that's where the Aaron, trusting in on Aaron Banks, trusting Javon Kinlaw is going to come back on the defensive side, trusting Jalen Moore at right tackle or Justin School or whoever it is. So there are holes. They're not perfect, but I think this team, with the way that they're currently constructed, can be right back in the playoffs next year, and they're going to be fighting with the Rams for the playoff spot or a championship.
And I think it's fair to point out that, all we look at is the end result of the 49ers did not sign Laken Tomlinson. They did not sign DJ Jones. Other teams were able to do that. But it is fair to assume that the 49ers had the intention of bringing those guys back. And in their calculations of where they capped themselves out at a price point, they took into account, hey, would we love to have Laken Tomlinson back? Yes, absolutely. That would be plan A. And the reason that we're not willing to pay him more than, let's say their figure was $11 million a year, the reason we won't go above 11 is because we do have a reasonable backup plan in Aaron Banks. It's not the ideal. Plan A would be, let's sign Laken Tomlinson for $11 million. But at some point with roster construction, it is an allocation of assets. It is a puzzle that you must put together, and you do have parameters. I know we like to say that the salary cap isn't real. It's very real. It's just a set of rules that you must operate within, and you can get extremely creative in how you do that, but you still have to operate within it. So I think it's fair to assume that the 49ers took those considerations into mind as they sort of priced out, hey, where would we bring DJ Jones back at, and where do we just let him go because we have to build the rest of the roster?
Yeah, I agree. And that's where we are right now. There's going to be a lot of hand wringing until this team hits the field. And I think that once this team hits the field, I think they are capable of doing some great things. And like I said, I am 100% down for the 49ers bringing Jimmy Garoppolo back and having an all-out quarterback controversy in August. Give me a huge number of views because everybody's going to want to know how that whole thing plays out. And I keep saying, I'm going to finish on this because I know we're running out on time, but it's just, I think it's just something to talk about. that's really interesting, because are the 49ers headed for a quarterback competition if they keep Jimmy Garoppolo? Is it fair to Trey Lance? Is it going to tear the locker room apart? Again, we saw this already play out to an extent. We saw it play out in 2021. Everybody that's saying that it's a toxic environment, what is any different between now and then? It really isn't any different. And what you do is you put these guys on the field, and if Trey Lance does what everybody expects Trey Lance to do, who's your starting quarterback week 1? Trey Lance.
Yeah.
And do you honestly think that there's anybody on the 49ers team that would not want to play for Trey Lance if he shows that he is the obvious choice to be the quarterback week 1? Does anybody really believe that there's guys on this roster who would say, you know what, F that, I'm with Jimmy?
No, I think that you definitely would have the locker room go with the better player. I think the question becomes, what if it's not clear cut? What if it's sort of a back and forth like it was last offseason, where you had some people reporting that Jimmy looked better and you had some people reporting that Trey was flashing things? If both were true, both looked good at different times, and you have expectations. So my biggest thing is, what were these quarterbacks as human beings? What were their expectations coming into it? I have to go back to Jimmy Garoppolo and the emotional farewell to the fan base, to the team. I have to imagine that would just be a complicated emotional situation for him to walk back into and become fully invested in again. And then for Trey, how upsetting would it be to go into this offseason? I mean, you heard him slip up and basically say it, like, is the plan you will be the starter going forward? And he says it, and then he walks it back a half a step. Sure. That's my understanding of what we're going to do. But you would think that's what the front office communicated to him in an exit interview. So what were those two players' emotional expectations, and can they reset themselves for this new environment wherein they may have to compete for that quarterback spot?
I mean, I think there's you just said a whole bunch of things. I'm going to hit the first one, and this is, if you go through a quarterback competition with Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance in training camp, and Trey Lance is not the clear-cut winner, that's a problem for the 49ers. That's a big problem for the 49ers.
That's a fair statement.
If that's what happens. When it comes to the recalibrating of their expectations, if it does come down to them, if it had been told that you are going to be the quarterback moving forward to Trey Lance, but now it's because of situations outside of their control, they're going to have to compete for it. I would hope that a player who is as competitive as Trey Lance and as competitive as Jimmy Garoppolo could recalibrate themselves and go out and and compete and not let it bother them. Just like if they were to throw an interception in the middle of a game that gets returned for a touchdown, how do you respond? And that would be what I would hope is the case.
Yeah, I think that's a fair hope, and that should be the expectation for them as professionals. I think it's fair to acknowledge that would be difficult for them to achieve. That it wouldn't just be flipping a switch. That it would actively take some emotional processing on both of their parts, because of the fact that it seemed so clear cut that this was, a tenth of a percent of a chance of happening. And now it seems very real. Now, like, if you had to handicap this right now, if you had to place an over under on the percentage that there is a true quarterback competition, what does your gut tell you right now, Jack?
That it does come down to an actual competition.
Yeah, where would you put the percentage chance? This is just off the cuff. This is just your feeling on it. But what percentage chance is it that it's a true quarterback competition, that Jimmy is here during camp?
I think it's under 50%. That it really comes down to that. That's what I'm thinking. If I thought you were going to ask me who I felt would win said competition. And in that case, I would go with Trey Lance. I think Trey Lance would win that competition.
Yeah,
I think that Trey Lance improved throughout last season to the point where he should be the starter. I don't see a problem in letting him compete for it. There are some folks that if you follow the team enough of us, there are folks who will tell you, and it's true. The 49ers have never really had a quarterback competition. going back to even the Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick. There wasn't really a competition in those days. It was kind of similar to the Jimmy Trey thing, except for there were some injury issues that caused it to get decided.
Right.
Um, I'm not saying this because I feel like Jimmy should be the starting quarterback. That's not why I'm
No.
going. I say that there should be a competition. I think that a competition makes everybody better. It would make Trey Lance better if he has to win the job by a comp. Everybody was saying that last year. Jimmy Garoppolo has got to be in a quarterback competition. He's got to. He needs to show that he can be better. He needs the. Well, why isn't the same true for Trey Lance? Why is everybody saying that Trey doesn't deserve to go in with Jimmy Garoppolo there and have to fight for a position? That's my only thing. What's the difference? And go from there.
Sure. And I think for me, it wouldn't actually be that bad of a strategy to pursue. To me, it's just the idea of projecting that this is the expectation for next year. It's Trey Lance's team, and then seeming to having to pivot on that because you're unable to trade Jimmy Garoppolo, and the resetting of expectations, the resetting of dynamic that then has to happen within the team. I think it will be difficult, but not insurmountable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it'll be fun. It's going to be a good time. And then one of the things over here, and we had somebody over here yelling at me from something I must have said a long time ago about Colin Kaepernick and Alex Smith. But Dr. Robert Anthony Jr. says Cap was a better runner. Let me go back to it. There it is. Cap was running better than Alex Smith was throwing. Here's the thing, and this is why I enjoy this analogy when it comes to Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo, is I don't think you might not see Trey Lance put up the completion percentage numbers that Jimmy Garoppolo puts up, but you're going to get more explosive plays in the passing game,
right?
I believe, because the ball is going to go downfield more often, which is going to make up for the lack of some of the whatever it's called, where it's the EPA, whatever that thing is, but then he's also going to make up for some of it with his legs. So it's just going to be fun. It's going to be a conversation to have. And I'm just telling you right now, buckle up. This is going to be a long off season if you're expecting Jimmy Garoppolo to be gone tomorrow.
Yeah,
every day.
I tend to agree that it's about that time to start your breathing exercises and have some patience.
Exactly. So thank you, Rob, for taking the time to join in. I know we didn't get it, all the way to the last topic, but we got through a whole lot of fun stuff, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this week plays out for San Francisco.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on, Jack.
You got a show coming up here too, right? In about 20 minutes?
I do. 5:00 on my channel. Very excited to have Jordan Elliott back on. I believe you've had him here on the channel. Very insightful dude.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. No, Jordan is great. That should be a good topic, conversation for you. That's awesome. Over here on my channel, I am going to go live at 7:00. Normally I don't do back 2 shows in a day, but you know what? Jack's having too much fun talking quarterback. So I'm going to be back at 7:00 tonight with everybody's favorite yeller, Niner Nick Newman, who has some epic rants after games if you follow him on Twitter. So I'll have him on here tonight at 7:00 for a show, talking a lot of the same things that we've already been talking, because that's what everybody wants to talk about. That's the topic around 49er land. Jimmy Garoppolo, get him the heck out of here. And I'm here to say, not so fast, my friend. We'll see. But thank you, Rob, for joining. Thank you to everybody who tuned in live. We had a pretty good group. If you could please hit that like button, get over to Rob's channel. Make sure that you're subscribed over there as well. Subscribe here. Hit the little bell notification so you know when we go live, and go get yourself over to 49ers.pressdemocrat.com. Make that a favorite on your taskbar so you can check it out on a daily basis. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. I'll be back at 7. Have a good one. Cheers, right?